What if the Force isn't exactly what the Jedi Council believed it to be? For generations, they studied its mysteries, created rules around its use, and claimed to understand its will. But what if they only glimpsed a fraction of its true nature? What if the light side of the Force is far more intricate, far more purposeful than anyone ever imagined? Throughout the Star Wars saga, we've witnessed moments that seemed like coincidence or luck. A farm boy making an impossible shot to destroy the Death Star. A princess sensing her twin brother's call for help. A father finding redemption at the perfect moment to save his son. But what if these weren't coincidences at all? What if the light side of the Force has been orchestrating events since the very beginning, weaving together destinies in ways so subtle that even the wisest Jedi Masters never fully understood? In this video, we'll explore theories that challenge everything we thought we knew about the light side of the Force. These aren't wild speculation or fan fiction, but carefully researched possibilities that might explain some of the saga's most pivotal moments. Each theory connects dots that have been hiding in plain sight, revealing patterns that could reshape our understanding of the entire Star Wars universe. The light side has secrets to share, and we're going to uncover them together. First up, a new twist on the Chosen One prophecy. The ancient Jedi prophecy of the Chosen One states that one would come, born of no father, to restore balance to the Force. For generations, the Jedi Order interpreted this to mean the destruction of the Sith. But what if they fundamentally misunderstood the true meaning of balance? What if the Force had a far more intricate plan in motion? When we examine the exact timing of events during Order 66 and the fall of the Republic, we discover something remarkable. The moment Anakin Skywalker fully embraced the dark side and became Darth Vader coincided precisely with the birth of his children, Luke and Leia. This wasn't a cosmic coincidence. The Force itself orchestrated this timing, creating a perfect symmetry that would ultimately fulfill the prophecy in an unexpected way. Consider the evidence. The ancient Jedi texts, particularly those studied by Qui-Gon Jinn, never explicitly stated the Chosen One would destroy the Sith through direct confrontation. In fact, the earliest known version of the prophecy, discovered in the depths of the Jedi archives, spoke of ultimate balance being restored through him, not by him. This subtle distinction proves crucial to understanding the Force's true design. The Force needed Anakin to fall, not because it demanded his destruction, but because it required the creation of two beings who would embody the purest aspects of the light side, untainted by the rigid dogma that had come to define the Jedi Order. Luke and Leia were born in the exact moment their father's shadow fell across the galaxy, creating a cosmic counterweight that would maintain the balance of the Force until the time was right. This explains why Padme survived just long enough to give birth and name her children. The Force sustained her life force precisely as long as necessary to ensure Luke and Leia would enter the galaxy at the moment of maximum darkness. Their first breaths came as their father took his first mechanical ones, a poetic symmetry that serves as the foundation of our theory. Look at how the Force then orchestrated their separation. Leia was raised as a princess of Alderaan, learning leadership, diplomacy, and resistance against tyranny. Luke grew up on Tatooine, just as his father had, developing the same raw connection to the Force that made Anakin so powerful. Each received exactly the upbringing they would need to play their part in the prophecy's fulfillment. The proof of this design becomes clear when we examine how balance was ultimately restored. It wasn't through lightsaber combat or force powers. The prophecy was fulfilled through love, specifically the love between father and children. Luke's compassion and Leia's unwavering belief in redemption created the emotional resonance that allowed Anakin to break free from the Emperor's control. This interpretation explains why the Jedi Council, for all their wisdom, failed to prevent Anakin's fall. They were looking for the wrong signs, expecting the prophecy to manifest through traditional Jedi strengths of combat and Force mastery. Instead, the Force was playing a longer game, using Anakin as a vessel to create the perfect instruments of balance, his children. The timing of major events throughout the original trilogy supports this theory. Luke's training with Yoda wasn't about making him powerful enough to defeat Vader. It was about preparing him to awaken the light that still existed within his father. Meanwhile, Leia's resistance activities kept hope alive in the galaxy, creating the political and spiritual environment necessary for redemption to have meaning. This also explains why the Force allowed Obi-Wan and Yoda to survive Order 66. They weren't preserved to rebuild the Jedi Order, but to guide Luke and Leia when the time was right. Their roles were not to train new warriors, but to preserve the knowledge and wisdom that would help Anakin's children understand their true purpose. The Force's plan becomes even clearer when we examine the moment of Vader's redemption. It wasn't Luke's skill with a lightsaber that defeated the Emperor. It was the sight of his son's suffering that awakened Anakin's paternal love, a love that had been dormant since the moment of his children's birth. The Force had created a perfect circle, using the power of family bonds to restore the balance that had been lost. Even the location of the final confrontation holds significance. The second Death Star, like the first, represented the ultimate expression of the dark side's desire for control through destruction. That Anakin's redemption occurred here, choosing to save his son rather than maintain his power, proves that the prophecy was always about transformation through love, not victory through destruction. Throughout Star Wars history, Force visions have been mysterious and complex things. We know Force-sensitive people can see possible futures, but as Master Yoda always reminded his students, the future is constantly in motion. This makes what happened during one of the most important moments in galactic history even more fascinating. We are talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi's final face-to-face confrontation with Darth Vader aboard the Death Star. Here is what many fans have missed about this legendary moment. During those final seconds of his life, Obi-Wan Kenobi might have experienced something incredible. A Force vision that showed him two completely different paths the future could take. This fits perfectly with everything we know about how Force visions work. We have seen other Jedi experience similar moments of clarity, like when Yoda glimpsed fragments of Order 66, or when Anakin saw possible futures involving Padme. What makes this theory so interesting is how well it matches with everything we know about Obi-Wan's incredible connection to the Force. By this point in his life, he had spent years learning directly from Qui-Gon Jinn's spirit, growing in wisdom and understanding far beyond what most Jedi ever achieved. We know Jedi can become better at receiving and interpreting visions through meditation and training, which is exactly what Obi-Wan had been doing during all those years alone in the desert of Tatooine. So what exactly did Obi-Wan see in this vision? The first possible future showed him what would happen if he kept fighting Vader. This makes complete sense when you think about it. Obi-Wan had already beaten Vader once before on Mustafar, He knew every move, every technique his former student might use. Even with all of Vader's cybernetic enhancements, Obi-Wan's incredible defensive fighting style might have given him the edge. But this vision showed him something terrible. Winning the fight would lead to disaster for Luke's future. According to this theory, if Obi-Wan had defeated Vader again, it would have completely changed Luke's path. Instead of being inspired by his mentor's sacrifice and driven to understand the ways of the Jedi, Luke would have been consumed by anger and the desire for revenge against the Empire. We have seen this pattern play out again and again in Star Wars. The desire for revenge almost always leads to the dark side. It happened to Anakin. It happened to Count Dooku. And in this alternate future, it would have happened to Luke too. But then Obi-Wan saw a second possible future. This was the path he ultimately chose, one where his sacrifice would accomplish several crucial things. First, it would create the distraction needed for Luke, Leia, and the others to escape the Death Star. But more importantly, it would give Luke the kind of loss that leads to growth and understanding rather than anger and hatred. This lines up perfectly with everything the Jedi believed about self-sacrifice and choosing peace over violence whenever possible. This theory explains so many little details about that final duel. Remember that mysterious smile on Obi-Wan's face just before Vader struck him down? It never made sense before, but if he had just seen a vision showing him that this was the only way to save not just Luke, but possibly Anakin's soul as well, that smile becomes incredibly powerful. We have seen other Jedi act on their visions in crucial moments exactly like this. The theory also helps explain why Obi-Wan was able to guide Luke so effectively as a Force spirit immediately after his death. If he had already seen these events through the Force, he would have been completely prepared to continue teaching Luke from beyond. This matches everything we know about Force ghosts and how Jedi can maintain their identity after death if they prepare properly and have a strong enough purpose. Think about Obi-Wan's famous last words to Vader. "If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." Everyone always thought he just meant becoming a Force ghost. But what if he was also talking about how his sacrifice would shape everything that came after? How it would help Luke grow into a true Jedi and eventually lead to Anakin Skywalker's redemption? Looking at Obi-Wan's whole story through this lens makes everything deeper. We see him grow from someone who strictly followed every Jedi rule to someone who truly understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with the Force is choose not to use it at all. His decision to sacrifice himself becomes not just a noble death, but a moment of incredible wisdom and foresight. This theory tells us something profound about how the light side of the Force really works. It is not about showing off power or winning fights. It is about sacrifice, wisdom, and trusting in the larger purpose of the Force itself. This fits perfectly with everything Star Wars has taught us about the difference between light and dark. While the dark side is all about domination and control, the light side guides and protects through understanding and sacrifice. When you look at all the evidence, it paints an incredible picture. That smile, those cryptic words, the perfect timing of his sacrifice, and everything that came after. It all suggests that in those final moments, Obi-Wan Kenobi saw far beyond the simple duel in front of him. He saw the paths of possible futures stretching out before him and made the choice that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. A choice that would eventually help bring balance to the Force itself. The Battle of Naboo holds one of the most pivotal moments in Star Wars history, though not for the reasons most people think. While many see Qui-Gon Jinn's death as simply a tragic loss to Darth Maul's superior combat skills, there might be something far more profound at work. According to this fascinating theory, Qui-Gon's death was not just fate or bad luck. It was a conscious choice made through the light side of the Force. Let us look at what we know about Qui-Gon's final battle. As an experienced Jedi Master nearing 60 years old, he was already showing signs of fatigue during the intense duel with Maul. But Qui-Gon was no ordinary Jedi. He had spent years studying ancient Force techniques, particularly those of the Whills. He understood aspects of the Force that many other Jedi had forgotten or ignored. This theory suggests that in those final moments of combat, Qui-Gon received a profound insight through the Force. He saw that his direct involvement in Anakin's training would ultimately not serve the greater good. Qui-Gon was known for his maverick nature and his willingness to bend or even break Jedi rules when he felt it was right. While these qualities made him an extraordinary Jedi, they might have made him exactly the wrong person to train the Chosen One. Consider what we know about Anakin Skywalker's personality. He was already struggling with attachment issues, fear of loss, and a tendency to rebel against authority. Under Qui-Gon's more permissive guidance, these traits might have gone unchecked. Qui-Gon's tendency to follow his own path rather than Jedi tradition could have reinforced Anakin's natural inclination to reject rules and structure. But Obi-Wan Kenobi was different. He represented a perfect balance of compassion and discipline. While he understood and respected Jedi traditions, he was not blindly bound by them. His more structured approach to training would provide the boundaries and guidance that Anakin desperately needed, even if it could not ultimately prevent his fall. The theory suggests that Qui-Gon realized something profound in those final moments. He understood that Anakin's journey would necessarily include both a fall to darkness and an eventual return to light. The path to bringing balance to the Force would not be a straight line, but rather a complex journey through both light and shadow. For this journey, Anakin would need a teacher who could instill proper Jedi discipline while still maintaining enough flexibility to understand change and growth. This explains Qui-Gon's famous last words, where he made Obi-Wan promise to train Anakin. It was not merely a dying man's desperate request. It was a carefully considered choice, made with the wisdom granted by the Force itself. By placing Anakin's training in Obi-Wan's hands, Qui-Gon was setting up the exact circumstances needed for the prophecy of the Chosen One to ultimately be fulfilled. But the theory goes even deeper. Qui-Gon's choice to become one with the Force was not just about choosing the right teacher for Anakin. It was about positioning himself to guide both Anakin and Obi-Wan from beyond death. Remember, Qui-Gon had already discovered the secret of retaining consciousness after death, though he had not yet perfected the technique. By accepting his physical death, he could focus entirely on mastering this ability. This explains why Qui-Gon was the first known Jedi to return as a Force spirit. He did not achieve this by accident. He had been preparing for it, understanding that his influence would be more powerful as a spirit guide than as a living teacher. From this state of pure Force consciousness, he could watch over both Obi-Wan and Anakin, offering guidance when needed without directly interfering with their necessary journey. Think about how this played out. Qui-Gon's spirit later taught Yoda and Obi-Wan how to maintain their consciousness after death. This knowledge proved crucial in allowing them to continue guiding Luke Skywalker even after their own physical deaths. In this way, Qui-Gon's sacrifice laid the groundwork for not just Anakin's eventual redemption, but for the entire future of the Jedi Order. The timing of Qui-Gon's death also proves interesting when examined through this lens. It occurred exactly when Anakin was at his most vulnerable, having just left his mother and facing an uncertain future. This emotional crucible forced Obi-Wan to step up not just as a teacher, but as a father figure. While Qui-Gon might have been too lenient with Anakin's emotional attachments, Obi-Wan's more measured approach helped Anakin navigate his fears and doubts, even if he could not ultimately overcome them. Looking at the long arc of Star Wars history, we can see how Qui-Gon's choice influenced everything that came after. His death sparked a chain of events that would eventually lead to balance being brought to the Force, though not in the way anyone expected. By sacrificing himself, he set up a complex web of relationships and influences that would span generations. Consider too how this sacrifice exemplifies the true nature of the light side of the Force. Where the dark side is about preserving the self at all costs, the light side often requires letting go, sacrificing personal power for the greater good. Qui-Gon's choice to lay down his life, not in defeat, but in wisdom, represents the highest ideals of the Jedi philosophy. This theory transforms our understanding of that famous duel on Naboo. What appeared to be a moment of tragedy becomes instead a moment of profound sacrifice and foresight. Through the Force, Qui-Gon saw the path that needed to be taken, and he had the wisdom and courage to follow it, even at the cost of his own life. In doing so, he demonstrated that sometimes the greatest victories come not through fighting, but through letting go. When we first meet Yoda on Dagobah, he appears as a strange little creature living alone in a swamp. Most assume he chose this remote world simply to hide from the Empire, but there might be something far more intentional about his choice. According to this theory, Yoda selected Dagobah not just as a hiding place, but as a location he could transform into the perfect training ground for the next generation of Jedi. What we know about Dagobah makes this theory particularly interesting. The planet was already strong with the Force when Yoda arrived, but in a unique way. It contained a powerful dark side nexus centered in the cave where Luke would later face his vision of Vader. This dark presence actually made Dagobah perfect for Yoda's purposes, but not just because it helped mask his presence from the Empire. Think about what Yoda was really doing during those long years of exile. He spent decades in deep meditation, communing with the Force and learning from the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn. We know from the Clone Wars that Yoda was studying the secrets of maintaining consciousness after death, but this theory suggests he was doing something even more remarkable. With each passing year, his constant light side meditation was actually changing the Force atmosphere of Dagobah itself. The concept of Force nexuses is well established in Star Wars lore. These are locations where the Force naturally concentrates and flows more powerfully. What makes this theory so fascinating is the idea that such nexuses can be influenced and shaped by prolonged Force use. Yoda, as one of the most powerful Jedi who ever lived, would have been capable of gradually infusing the swamps of Dagobah with light side energy. But why would Yoda want to create this light side nexus? Because he understood something crucial about Luke's future training. The last Jedi would need more than just instruction in lightsaber combat or Force techniques. He would need a place where the very environment could help him understand the fundamental nature of the Force itself. This explains why the dark side cave remained so important. Yoda did not try to cleanse or eliminate it. Instead, he created a perfect balance. The dark side cave provided a crucial testing ground, while the surrounding swamps, strengthened by decades of Yoda's light side meditation, created an environment where a student could safely explore both aspects of the Force without being consumed by darkness. Consider how perfectly this setup worked for Luke's training. The harsh physical environment taught endurance and persistence. The dark side cave provided vital spiritual challenges, and the light side energy Yoda had spent years cultivating helped Luke develop his Force abilities at an accelerated pace. What seemed like a random swamp was actually a carefully prepared training environment, fine-tuned over decades by one of the greatest Jedi Masters in history. This theory also explains some of Yoda's more puzzling behavior during Luke's training. His seemingly random tests and bizarre teaching methods make more sense if you understand that the entire planet had become part of the training program. When Yoda told Luke to feel the Force flowing through the trees, vines, and creatures, he was not speaking metaphorically. He had spent years strengthening those very connections. The theory suggests that Yoda's influence extended far beyond the immediate area around his hut. Through years of meditation and communion with the Force, he had created a web of light side energy throughout Dagobah's swamps. This network would have been invisible to normal senses, but would have been perfect for teaching a new Jedi how to perceive and connect with the Force. Think about what we know about Force-sensitive places in Star Wars. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was powerful because generations of Jedi had meditated and trained there. This theory suggests Yoda was doing something similar on Dagobah, but with a specific purpose in mind. He was not just maintaining a connection to the Force, he was actively preparing the environment for its future role in rebuilding the Jedi Order. This also adds new meaning to Yoda's choice to remain on Dagobah, even after Luke left. He was not just waiting to die, he was continuing to strengthen and maintain the light side nexus he had created. Even after his physical death, this nexus would remain, a testament to his foresight and dedication to the future of the Jedi. The timing of Luke's arrival becomes even more significant under this theory. Yoda had spent exactly the right amount of time preparing Dagobah. If Luke had arrived earlier, the environment might not have been ready. If he had arrived much later, the balance Yoda had so carefully cultivated might have begun to fade. Instead, Luke arrived at precisely the moment when Dagobah's Force environment was perfectly calibrated for his training. Looking at the larger picture, this theory transforms our understanding of Yoda's exile. What appeared to be a defensive retreat becomes instead a profound act of preparation and foresight. Through decades of patient work, Yoda transformed a simple swamp planet into a powerful tool for preserving and passing on the Jedi tradition. It was not just about hiding from the Empire. It was about preparing for the moment when the Force would begin to restore balance to the galaxy. This interpretation shows us something profound about the nature of the light side. Where the dark side often seeks quick results through dramatic displays of power, the light side works through patience, preparation, and subtle influence. Yoda's decades of quiet meditation, gradually strengthening the Force presence on Dagobah, exemplifies this approach perfectly. He understood that sometimes the most powerful actions are the ones that take the longest to bear fruit. The final moments between Padme Amidala and Anakin Skywalker have always been shrouded in mystery and tragedy. But there might be something far more significant about Padme's last words than anyone realized. This theory suggests that when she used her final breath to insist there was still good in Anakin, she unknowingly created a Force technique so powerful it would eventually help bring down the entire Empire. We know that Padme was not Force-sensitive in any traditional sense. She never displayed any ability to use the Force actively. However, the Force flows through all living things, and in moments of extreme emotion or significance, even non-Force-sensitive individuals can sometimes channel its power without realizing it. This theory suggests that Padme's absolute love for Anakin, combined with her unshakable faith in his inherent goodness, created something unprecedented. The timing is particularly significant. Remember that Padme's death was carefully staged to appear as though she died while still pregnant. Bail Organa and Obi-Wan went to extraordinary lengths to maintain this deception, even having her body prepared to appear pregnant during her funeral procession. This elaborate cover-up helped protect Luke and Leia, but it might have served another purpose too. By making it appear that the children died with her, they ensured that Vader's grief and guilt would be complete. This complete devastation of Anakin Skywalker's old life might have actually been crucial for Padme's Force anchor to work. In his darkest moment, when he believed he had destroyed everything he ever loved, her final words of faith in his goodness became embedded deep within his psyche. Like a seed planted in fertile soil, this light side anchor took root in the very foundation of his being. Think about how unusual Vader's eventual redemption really was. Throughout Star Wars history, we have seen very few examples of anyone breaking free from the dark side's influence, especially after being immersed in it for so long. Yet somehow, after decades of loyal service to Palpatine, after countless acts of cruelty and oppression, Anakin Skywalker was able to break free. This theory suggests that Padme's Force anchor made this possible. The anchor worked in subtle ways throughout Vader's years of service to the Empire. Notice how he never fully embraced the Sith philosophy of complete emotional detachment. While other Sith sought to eliminate all traces of love and attachment, Vader remained haunted by his past. He kept returning to places connected to Padme, maintained some connection to his old identity, and never completely severed his capacity for love. This theory helps explain why that specific moment, watching Palpatine torture Luke, was the trigger for Vader's redemption. It wasn't just seeing his son in pain. It was seeing his son in pain while maintaining the same unshakable faith in his father's goodness that Padme had expressed with her dying breath. This parallel activated the dormant Force anchor, finally giving Anakin the strength to break free from Palpatine's influence. Consider, too, how this fits with what we know about the light side of the Force. While the dark side operates through dominance and control, the light side often works through love, faith, and connection. Padme's final act was a perfect expression of these principles. She did not try to control or change Anakin. She simply stated her absolute faith in his inherent goodness, creating a reminder that would echo through decades. The power of this Force anchor also explains some of Vader's behavior that never quite made sense otherwise. His obsession with finding Luke, for instance, went beyond simple dark side desire for power. The anchor created by Padme made him instinctively seek out connections to his old life, even if he did not consciously understand why. It kept some small part of Anakin Skywalker alive within the shell of Darth Vader. We can see evidence of the anchor's influence in how Vader treated Luke compared to other potential apprentices. While he was ruthless and manipulative with others, something always held him back with Luke. Even when he claimed he wanted to rule the galaxy with his son, he never actually tried to corrupt Luke the way Palpatine did. The anchor prevented him from fully embracing the dark side approach to father and son. This also adds new meaning to Luke's own unwavering faith in his father's capacity for redemption. Perhaps through the Force, he could sense the anchor his mother had created. This would explain why he remained so certain there was still good in Vader, even when everyone else, including Obi-Wan and Yoda, believed Anakin Skywalker was truly gone. He was unconsciously sensing the light side energy his mother had embedded in his father's soul. The theory suggests that Padme's Force anchor worked in perfect harmony with Luke's efforts to redeem his father. While Luke provided the external catalyst, actively reaching out to the good in Vader, the anchor provided the internal foundation that made redemption possible. It was the combination of these forces, mother and son both believing in Anakin's fundamental goodness, that finally broke Palpatine's hold. Looking at the larger picture, this interpretation transforms Padme's death from a simple tragedy into something far more profound. Her final act of love and faith created a light side influence so subtle yet so powerful that it survived decades of darkness. It waited patiently within Vader's heart until exactly the right moment, then helped restore balance to the Force just as the prophecy had foretold. This understanding of Padme's last words also adds new depth to the concept of balance in the Force. It suggests that sometimes the most powerful Force techniques are not the obvious displays of power, but the quiet moments of pure love and faith. Padme, without any training or conscious intent, created something that all the Force powers of the Emperor could not overcome. When Luke Skywalker arrived on Dagobah, he was already unusually strong in the Force. As the son of Anakin Skywalker, who had the highest midi-chlorian count ever recorded, Luke inherited tremendous Force potential. Yet something fascinating happened during his training with Yoda. Every time Luke said, "I do not believe it," he might have been doing much more than expressing doubt. According to this theory, he was unconsciously using an advanced Force technique on himself, creating safety limits that prevented him from accessing too much power too quickly. To understand why this would be significant, we need to look at what happened to Anakin Skywalker. Born with unprecedented Force potential, Anakin's powers developed at an incredible rate. He was already showing extraordinary abilities before any formal training, and his growth in the Force continued at an alarming pace throughout his life. This rapid accumulation of power, combined with his emotional nature, ultimately contributed to his fall to the dark side. The parallels between father and son were striking. Like Anakin, Luke began his training late by traditional Jedi standards. Like Anakin, he showed remarkable natural talent with the Force. And like Anakin, he had strong emotional attachments that could potentially lead him down a dark path. But there was one crucial difference. Where Anakin's powers grew unchecked, Luke's development followed a more controlled pattern. This theory suggests that Luke unconsciously developed a protective mechanism. Every time he encountered something that seemed impossible with the Force, his statement of disbelief actually created a temporary mental block. This was not a limitation in the traditional sense, but rather a form of Force persuasion turned inward, allowing him to learn and grow at a pace his mind and spirit could handle. Consider the famous scene where Luke fails to lift his X-Wing from the swamp. When he says, "I do not believe it," he is not just expressing doubt. According to this theory, he is actually using the Force to create a temporary barrier in his mind, preventing himself from accessing the full extent of his power until he is mentally and emotionally ready for it. This explains why he could not lift the ship that day, but would later be capable of far more impressive Force feats. This self-imposed limiting mechanism would have been crucial for Luke's development. We know that the Force flows more strongly in the Skywalker bloodline than almost any other family in galactic history. Luke had inherited his father's tremendous Force potential, but he also had the wisdom, even if unconscious, to understand that too much power too quickly could be dangerous. The theory helps explain several puzzling aspects of Luke's training. For instance, why did some Force abilities come to him naturally, while others required significant effort? According to this interpretation, his unconscious Force persuasion was selectively limiting his access to powers based on his emotional and spiritual readiness to handle them responsibly. Think about how this contrasts with Anakin's development. Anakin's incredible powers often manifested in moments of strong emotion, particularly anger or fear. His abilities grew rapidly, but without the internal structure needed to handle them wisely. Luke, on the other hand, tended to make his biggest breakthroughs in moments of calm and focus, suggesting his power was developing in a more balanced way. This also explains why Luke's training, though brief by traditional Jedi standards, was ultimately successful in a way his father's was not. The mental blocks he created forced him to master each aspect of the Force thoroughly before moving on to the next. He could not simply overwhelm problems with raw power, as Anakin often did. Instead, he had to develop a deeper understanding of the Force. The timing of these self-imposed limitations is particularly interesting. They seem to appear most strongly during his initial training with Yoda, when the risk of following his father's path would have been greatest. As Luke matured in his understanding of the Force, these limitations gradually lifted, allowing him to access more of his innate power in a controlled way. This interpretation adds new meaning to Yoda's teachings about the Force. When Yoda told Luke that he failed because he did not believe, he might have been recognizing this self-limiting mechanism. Rather than simply encouraging Luke to believe in himself, Yoda was teaching him that these mental blocks, while protective, needed to be overcome through proper training and understanding rather than raw power. Looking at Luke's later accomplishments, we can see how this pattern of controlled growth served him well. Unlike his father, who often relied on overwhelming Force power, Luke developed a more nuanced approach. His greatest victories came not from superior power, but from understanding when and how to use the Force wisely. The theory also helps explain why Luke was ultimately able to resist the Emperor's temptations where his father had failed. By developing his powers gradually, always in step with his emotional and spiritual growth, Luke built the internal strength needed to resist the lure of the dark side. His self-imposed limitations had forced him to develop wisdom alongside power. This pattern of controlled growth through unconscious Force persuasion reveals something profound about the nature of Jedi training. Traditional Jedi wisdom held that starting training too late was dangerous because students would lack the lifetime of carefully structured development normally provided by the Order. Luke found a way around this through his unconscious use of the Force, creating his own structured development path. In the end, this theory suggests that Luke's greatest strength might not have been his raw power in the Force, but rather his unconscious wisdom in knowing how to develop that power safely. His famous words of disbelief were not expressions of limitations, but rather tools for ensuring his power grew in harmony with his ability to use it wisely. The moment Order 66 began, Jedi across the galaxy fell to their own troops in a devastating wave of betrayal. We all remember how Yoda clutched his chest and stumbled during this moment, apparently overwhelmed by sensing so many deaths through the Force. But what if there was something far more profound happening in that moment? According to this theory, Yoda was not just passively experiencing these deaths. He was actively working to preserve fragments of the dying Jedi's light side energy. This theory suggests that in those crucial moments, Yoda performed one of the most remarkable Force techniques ever attempted. As he felt each Jedi's death, he reached out through the Force and gathered the lingering energy of their connection to the light side. This was not about preserving consciousness, as Force ghosts do, but about saving the pure essence of their connection to the light side of the Force. The physical toll this took on Yoda explains why he was so severely affected in that moment. He was not just feeling the deaths. He was actively channeling and containing an enormous amount of Force energy, drawing it into himself from across the galaxy. The pain and weakness he displayed came from the strain of holding so much pure light side energy at once. But Yoda knew he could not contain this energy within himself indefinitely. This is where his walking stick enters the story. According to this theory, Yoda's stick was not just a mobility aid or a simple tool. It was carefully chosen and prepared as a vessel to store this preserved Force energy. This explains why he was so insistent on keeping this specific walking stick throughout his exile, even though he was clearly agile enough to move without it when needed. Think about how this changes our understanding of Yoda's exile on Dagobah. He was not just hiding or waiting. He was guarding this precious repository of light side energy, carefully preserved from the moment of the Jedi Purge. Each tap of his stick against the ground was actually releasing tiny amounts of this stored Force energy, gradually reintroducing it back into the galaxy. This adds new meaning to Yoda's interactions with Luke during training. When he would tap Luke with the stick or use it to emphasize a point, he was actually doing more than getting his students' attention. He was allowing Luke to absorb small amounts of this preserved Jedi wisdom and power. This explains why Luke was able to progress so quickly in his training despite starting so late by traditional Jedi standards. The theory suggests that Yoda was extremely careful with how he dispensed this stored energy. He could not simply transfer all of it to Luke at once. That much pure light side power could overwhelm or even harm someone not prepared to receive it. Instead, he released it gradually, in harmony with Luke's growing ability to understand and handle the Force. Consider how this fits with what we know about the Force. Throughout Star Wars history, we have seen that certain objects can store and channel Force energy. The Kyber crystals used in lightsabers are perhaps the most famous example. Yoda's walking stick, according to this theory, served a similar purpose but on a far grander scale, preserving not just energy but the essence of an entire order's connection to the light side. This also explains something that has long puzzled fans. Why did Yoda, who could clearly move things with the Force and jump acrobatically when needed, rely so heavily on this stick? The answer, according to this theory, is that he was not really relying on it at all. Every time he leaned on it or used it to walk slowly, he was actually performing a kind of moving meditation, gradually and purposefully releasing stored Force energy back into the galaxy. The timing of Yoda's death becomes more significant under this interpretation. He held on until Luke's training had progressed far enough that he could handle the responsibility of carrying on the Jedi tradition. Only then did Yoda allow himself to become one with the Force. But what happened to the walking stick and its stored energy? The theory suggests that by this point, most of the preserved Force energy had been gradually released back into the galaxy or transferred to Luke through his training. This adds another layer to the restoration of the Jedi Order. It was not just about passing on knowledge and traditions. Thanks to Yoda's actions during Order 66, actual fragments of the old Order's connection to the light side survived and were gradually reintroduced into the galaxy. This meant that the new Jedi Order that would eventually rise was not just inspired by the old Order, but contained actual preserved elements of its Force connection. The theory also helps explain why the Empire was never able to completely extinguish the light side of the Force. Even though they killed most of the Jedi and destroyed their temples, they could not destroy this carefully preserved essence of light side energy. Yoda had ensured that some fragment of the old Order's power and wisdom would survive, literally preserved in the humble form of a walking stick. Looking at the larger picture, this theory transforms our understanding of both Order 66 and the eventual restoration of the Jedi Order. What seemed like total destruction was actually the beginning of a carefully planned preservation and renewal. Through Yoda's foresight and mastery of the Force, the essence of the Jedi Order quite literally survived, waiting to be gradually restored to the galaxy through his patient work during those long years of exile. The final confrontation between Count Dooku and Anakin Skywalker aboard the Invisible Hand stands as one of the most pivotal moments in Star Wars history. But there has always been something strange about those final seconds before Anakin takes Dooku's head. The former Jedi Master hesitates, showing an uncharacteristic moment of vulnerability. Many assumed it was simply fear or shock at Palpatine's betrayal, but this theory suggests something far more profound was happening in that moment. According to this interpretation, what Dooku experienced in those final seconds was a Force vision of incredible clarity and power. In that brief pause between Palpatine's command and Anakin's strike, Dooku saw not just his death, but an entire alternate timeline. He witnessed what might have been if he had made different choices, particularly regarding Anakin Skywalker. Consider what we know about Dooku's history. He was not just any fallen Jedi. He was Qui-Gon Jinn's former master, trained by Yoda himself. He had grown disillusioned with the Jedi Order and the Republic, seeing corruption and stagnation where once he saw wisdom and justice. But according to this theory, his vision showed him another path he could have taken with that disillusionment. In this vision, rather than leaving the Order entirely, Dooku saw himself taking on the role of Anakin's teacher. It makes a certain sense. Dooku had the diplomatic skills of a noble, the fighting prowess of a master duelist, and perhaps, most importantly, the maverick streak that had also characterized his former apprentice, Qui-Gon. He would have understood Anakin's frustrations with Jedi dogma while still being experienced enough to guide those feelings constructively. The vision showed Dooku how he could have merged the best aspects of multiple teaching styles. From Qui-Gon, he could have taught Anakin to question authority and trust in the living Force. From Yoda, he could have imparted the wisdom and patience needed to temper Anakin's raw power. And from his own experiences with politics and nobility, he could have helped Anakin navigate the complex world of the Republic's power structures. This explains why Dooku remained silent in his final moments instead of trying to warn Anakin about Palpatine. The vision showed him that it was already too late. His choices had set them all on this path, and now the consequences were unavoidable. The profound regret of seeing what might have been paralyzed him just long enough for Anakin to strike. Think about how this could have changed everything. A Dooku who remained with the Order, who channeled his frustrations into reforming the system rather than destroying it, could have been exactly the mentor Anakin needed. He would have understood Anakin's marriage to Padme, having seen how rigid Jedi rules about attachment could drive good people away. He could have helped Anakin find balance between his duties and his heart. The theory suggests that in this alternate timeline, Dooku saw himself preventing Palpatine's rise to power. His political acumen, combined with Anakin's raw power and potential, could have exposed the Sith Lord's machinations before they came to fruition. Instead, his own fall to the dark side had made him a crucial piece in Palpatine's game, helping to push Anakin toward the very fate he could have prevented. This interpretation adds new layers to Dooku's character throughout the Clone Wars. His particular interest in Anakin, his attempts to warn Obi-Wan about Sidious on Geonosis, his moments of apparent regret or hesitation, all take on new meaning. Part of him might have sensed this potential alternate path all along, even before the final vision made it crystal clear. The theory also explains why the light side would grant Dooku this vision in his final moments. It was not cruel torture, showing him what he had lost. It was a final lesson about the nature of choice and consequence. The light side was showing him how small decisions, accumulating over time, can lead us far from our intended path. Consider, too, how this fits with what we know about Force visions. They often come at moments of great significance, showing possible futures or critical truths. But this vision of the past, of what might have been, represents something different. It suggests that the light side can also show us the roads not taken, perhaps as a way of understanding our own journey more fully. This understanding transforms Dooku's death from a simple execution into something more tragic and meaningful. His final moment of hesitation was not weakness, but recognition. He saw not just his own failures, but the cascading effects of his choices on the entire galaxy. The student he could have guided would become the one to strike him down, symbolizing how completely his choices had twisted his potential role in events. The profound nature of this vision also explains something else. When Anakin later tells Palpatine that killing Dooku did not feel right, he might have been sensing echoes of this alternate timeline through the Force. Some part of him could have recognized, even if unconsciously, that he had just eliminated someone who could have been a powerful ally and mentor in another life. The final scene of Return of the Jedi shows us the Force ghosts of Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin watching over the rebel celebration. Most viewers assume they are simply observing their victory, but this theory suggests something far more active was happening in that moment. These Force spirits were actually performing a crucial protective function, shielding Luke from the devastating wave of dark side energy released by Palpatine's death. To understand why this protection was necessary, we need to look at what happens when an immensely powerful Force user dies. Their energy does not simply disappear. It disperses into the surrounding area, potentially affecting everyone nearby. In the case of a Sith Lord as powerful as Palpatine, this release would have been catastrophic, especially for someone as Force-sensitive as Luke Skywalker. Think about what we know about Force ghosts. They are not simply echoes or memories. They are conscious entities who have learned to maintain their individual identity after death. This requires tremendous mastery of the light side of the Force. More importantly, these spirits can actively use Force powers, though not all of them. They can also manifest physically enough to interact with the living world when necessary. According to this theory, the three Force ghosts used this ability to create a protective barrier around Luke. Their combined light side energy formed a shield that filtered out the toxic dark side power released by Palpatine's violent end. This explains why Luke was able to emerge from this confrontation with his connection to the light side not only intact, but stronger than ever. Consider the unique qualifications of each ghost for this task. Obi-Wan had spent years studying this technique with Qui-Gon Jinn, mastering the ability to maintain consciousness after death. Yoda had centuries of experience with the Force and understood both its light and dark aspects intimately. And Anakin, newly returned to the light, would have had fresh insight into the nature of dark side energy and how to protect against it. This theory helps explain why these particular spirits chose to manifest at that exact moment. They were not just celebrating, they were performing one final act of protection for Luke, using their combined knowledge and power to shield him from what could have been a spiritually devastating event. Their presence was both symbolic and practical, representing the triumph of the light side while actively preserving its newest champion. The timing is particularly significant. Force ghosts cannot maintain their manifestation indefinitely. The fact that all three appeared together at this specific moment suggests they understood the danger and coordinated their efforts. They knew that Palpatine's death, while necessary, could have had unintended consequences for those nearby. Look at how this fits with what we know about Force ghost abilities. While they cannot typically affect the physical world directly, they can interact with Force-sensitive individuals. They can also travel instantly to any location they are familiar with, as long as there is sufficient Force energy present. Both of these abilities would have been crucial for creating this protective shield around Luke. This interpretation also adds new meaning to the peaceful expressions on the spirits' faces. They were not just satisfied with the Empire's defeat. They were actively maintaining a delicate Force technique, working in perfect harmony to protect Luke from the dark side backwash of Palpatine's demise. Their serenity came from the knowledge that they were completing one final mission together. The theory explains something else that has long puzzled fans. Why did Luke seem so completely at peace after such a traumatic confrontation? According to this interpretation, the Force ghosts were not just shielding him from dark side energy, but actively helping him process and release the spiritual trauma of the experience. Their presence provided both protection and healing. Consider too how this fits with the overall theme of balance in the Force. The death of a powerful dark side user created a dangerous instability. The presence of three light side spirits helped restore that balance, not just symbolically but in a practical, energetic sense. They ensured that Palpatine's final defeat would not come at the cost of corrupting the Jedi who brought it about. This understanding transforms our view of Force ghosts in general. They are not just advisors or observers, but active participants in maintaining the balance of the Force. Their ability to manifest in the physical world serves a greater purpose than just communication. It allows them to intervene at crucial moments when the balance between light and dark hangs in the balance. Looking at the larger picture, this theory suggests something profound about the nature of the light side. Even after death, those who master its teachings continue to serve and protect. The Force ghosts were not just preserving their individual identities. They were using their continued existence to actively shield the next generation from darkness, ensuring that the victory over the Sith would be complete and lasting. The presence of these three particular spirits also represents a perfect circle of mentorship and protection. Obi-Wan, who trained Anakin and watched over Luke. Yoda, who trained them all in different ways. And Anakin, whose return to the light made the victory possible. Together, they ensured that their legacy would continue uncorrupted, protecting Luke from the final dark echo of the empire they had all fought to overthrow. The duel on Mustafar stands as one of the most significant lightsaber battles in Star Wars history. While many focus on Obi-Wan's famous high ground advantage, this theory suggests something far more profound was at work. During this fight, Obi-Wan Kenobi discovered the deepest truth about Form 3 lightsaber combat, known as Soresu, and its ability to reflect an opponent's inner darkness back upon themselves. We know that Obi-Wan was recognized as not just a master of Soresu, but the master of this defensive form. Even Mace Windu, himself a legendary duelist, acknowledged Kenobi's supreme mastery of Form 3. But what made this style so perfectly suited for this particular confrontation? According to this theory, it was because Soresu's true purpose was not just defensive survival, but spiritual reflection. Consider what we know about Soresu. It was developed in response to the widespread use of blasters, focusing on tight blade control and precise defensive movements. Its masters were considered nearly invincible, able to create an impenetrable defense that would eventually exhaust and frustrate their opponents. But this theory suggests these practical benefits were actually byproducts of a deeper spiritual technique. The true power of Soresu, according to this interpretation, lay in its ability to create a kind of force mirror. Every defensive move, every deflected attack, was not just about physical survival. It was about reflecting the aggressor's energy back at them, both physically and spiritually. This explains why the style was particularly effective against dark side users, who were often consumed by their own aggressive emotions. Think about how this played out during the Mustafar duel. Throughout the fight, Obi-Wan maintained his defensive posture, rarely attacking directly. But each time he blocked or parried one of Anakin's furious attacks, he was not just defending himself, he was showing Anakin a reflection of his own darkness, his own aggression, his own fall from the light side. This theory suggests that during this particular duel, Obi-Wan achieved a complete understanding of this principle. As the fight progressed and Anakin became more aggressive, each defensive move became more than just a physical technique. It became a spiritual mirror, reflecting Anakin's choices and their consequences back at him. The high ground was not about tactical advantage. It was about creating the perfect position for this spiritual reflection to reach its culmination. Look at how Anakin reacts throughout the duel. His frustration grows not just because he cannot break through Obi-Wan's defense, but because each failed attack forces him to confront his own choices. Every time Obi-Wan blocks or deflects an attack, Anakin sees his own darkness reflected back at him. This explains his increasingly desperate and aggressive moves, culminating in the fatal leap that led to his defeat. The theory also explains why Obi-Wan kept trying to reason with Anakin during the fight. His words were not separate from his fighting style. They were part of the same technique, verbal reflections working in harmony with physical ones. Each time he reminded Anakin of their relationship or pointed out his fall to darkness, he was strengthening the reflective power of his defensive techniques. Consider, too, how this fits with what we know about the light side of the Force. Where the dark side seeks to dominate and destroy, the light side often works by illuminating and revealing. Soresu, as understood through this theory, was the perfect expression of this principle in combat form. It did not seek to overcome darkness with superior force, but to let darkness defeat itself through reflection. This understanding transforms our view of Obi-Wan's famous warning about the high ground. It was not just tactical advice. It was one final attempt to make Anakin see himself clearly. When Anakin ignored this warning and attempted his leap, he was not just making a tactical error. He was definitively rejecting the chance to see and understand his own darkness. The theory suggests that the final stroke that dismembered Anakin was not just a physical counterattack. It was the culmination of all the reflected darkness Anakin had been unable to confront throughout the duel. In that moment, all his aggression, all his hatred, all his fall from the light side came back upon him through Obi-Wan's perfect mastery of Soresu's true purpose. Looking at the larger picture, this interpretation helps explain why Obi-Wan was able to defeat Anakin despite his opponent's superior raw power. It was not about physical prowess or even force strength. It was about Obi-Wan's complete understanding of how to reflect darkness back upon itself. His mastery of Soresu had evolved beyond mere combat technique into a profound expression of light-side philosophy. This also adds new meaning to Obi-Wan's later rematch with Vader aboard the Death Star. In that final duel, he no longer needed to reflect Vader's darkness back at him. That work had been done on Mustafar. Instead, he could focus on creating one final lesson about sacrifice and transcendence, knowing that the seeds planted by his mastery of Soresu would eventually bear fruit in Anakin's redemption. Throughout the Clone Wars, Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano developed a relationship unlike any other in Jedi history. Their constant jokes, playful nicknames, and casual banter seemed to break with traditional Jedi formality. But according to this fascinating theory, their ongoing verbal sparring was actually creating something unprecedented in the Force. Without realizing it, they were developing a unique form of light-side communication that would echo through the decades. Think about how unusual their dynamic was for the Jedi Order. Where most Master and Padawan relationships maintained careful emotional distance, Anakin and Ahsoka embraced a warmth and humor that seemed almost irreverent. They called each other Snips and Sky Guy, joked in the middle of battles, and maintained a running commentary that lightened even their darkest moments. This theory suggests that each of these moments was actually creating tiny ripples in the Force. What made this Force connection unique was its foundation in genuine joy and friendship. Most Force bonds we know about were forged through formal training or intense shared experiences. But Anakin and Ahsoka created theirs almost accidentally through countless small moments of shared laughter and understanding. The light side of the Force, which feeds on positive emotions, would have been particularly receptive to this kind of connection. Consider how this played out years later when Ahsoka first confronted the truth about Vader. While other Jedi survivors might have sensed something familiar about the Dark Lord, Ahsoka knew with absolute certainty who lurked behind that mask. According to this theory, it was because those Force echoes of shared laughter still resonated between them, impossible to completely suppress even under layers of darkness and hate. The theory suggests that each joke, each nickname, each moment of shared humor created a kind of Force bookmark in their shared history. These were not just memories, but actual imprints in the Force itself. When Ahsoka encountered Vader, these echoes became active again, allowing her to recognize not just his Force signature, but the specific emotional resonance of their relationship. This explains something that has long puzzled fans. How was Ahsoka able to maintain such clarity about Anakin's true nature even after his fall? Other Jedi who had known him for years struggled to reconcile Anakin Skywalker with Darth Vader. But Ahsoka never lost sight of who he really was. The Force echoes of their shared humor gave her a unique insight into his true identity. Look at how this manifested during their confrontation on Malachor. When Ahsoka said, "I will not leave you, not this time," she was not just making an emotional appeal. She was actively engaging with those old Force echoes, trying to reawaken them in Vader. The fact that this caused him to hesitate, however briefly, suggests these echoes still had power even through the darkness of the dark side. The theory becomes even more interesting when we consider Ezra Bridger's role. Years later, Ahsoka was able to help Ezra understand the truth about Vader in a way no one else could. This was not just because she had known Anakin personally. According to this theory, the Force echoes she shared with Anakin allowed her to communicate the complexity of his character in a way that raw information or simple memories never could. Think about how this fits with what we know about the light side of the Force. While the dark side operates through fear, anger, and hatred, the light side is strengthened by positive emotions like joy, friendship, and yes, humor. Anakin and Ahsoka's banter was not just creating personal memories. It was actively generating light side energy that would persist far longer than either of them expected. This also helps explain why Vader seemed particularly affected by encounters with Ahsoka compared to other survivors of Order 66. The Force echoes of their shared humor were like cracks in his dark side armor, reminding him of a time when he could laugh, when he could feel joy, when he could be light. These reminders would have been particularly powerful because they were not tied to duty or obligation, but to genuine friendship. Consider too how this unique Force connection might have influenced Ahsoka's own development. Her ability to maintain a sense of humor and lightness, even in dark situations, became one of her defining characteristics. According to this theory, this was not just a personality trait, but a genuine Force technique she had developed unconsciously through her relationship with Anakin. The theory suggests that their humorous exchanges served another purpose as well. In creating these Force echoes, they were also establishing a kind of fail-safe in their relationship. Even if everything else changed, even if they found themselves on opposite sides of a galactic conflict, these echoes would remain as testament to their true connection. This understanding transforms our view of their relationship throughout the Clone Wars. What seemed like simple character development or entertaining dialogue was actually something far more profound. Every joke, every smirk, every playful exchange was contributing to a unique Force bond that would prove crucial in ways neither of them could have imagined. Looking at the larger picture, this theory suggests something important about the nature of the light side itself. It shows us that the Force works not just through grand gestures and formal training, but through genuine human connection. Anakin and Ahsoka's unique bond reminds us that sometimes the most powerful Force techniques are not the ones we consciously develop, but the ones that grow naturally from friendship, trust, and joy. When Luke Skywalker first arrived on Dagobah, he encountered what appeared to be a strange little creature, seemingly crazy and definitely annoying. This odd behavior has long been assumed to be a simple test of Luke's patience and character. But according to this theory, something far more sophisticated was actually taking place. Yoda was performing an ancient light side technique that temporarily transferred Luke's midichlorians to himself, allowing him to precisely measure the young Skywalker's Force potential. Consider Yoda's background and expertise. Having served as Grand Master of the Jedi Order for centuries, he had trained countless Jedi and would have developed an intimate understanding of Force potential. More importantly, he had personally witnessed Anakin Skywalker's incredible midichlorian count and seen how that raw power had ultimately led to devastating consequences. When Luke arrived seeking training, Yoda needed more than just observation to make his decision. This theory suggests that Yoda's apparently random actions were actually carefully choreographed to facilitate this midichlorian transfer. The rummaging through Luke's supplies, the physical contact, the sharing of food, all of these created opportunities for temporary cellular connection. This would have allowed Yoda to briefly host Luke's midichlorians within his own body, giving him a precise understanding of Luke's Force potential. Think about what we know about midichlorians. These microscopic life forms reside within the cells of all living things, and their concentration indicates Force sensitivity. Traditional Jedi would measure them through blood tests, but Yoda, with over 800 years of experience and deep knowledge of the Force, might have developed more subtle techniques for assessment. The theory helps explain several puzzling aspects of this first encounter. Why did Yoda maintain his act even after Luke clearly grew frustrated? Because the transfer required sustained interaction and multiple points of contact. Why did he seem so physically energetic despite his advanced age? Because he was temporarily hosting an additional complement of midichlorians, boosting his own already considerable Force connection. This also sheds new light on Yoda's immediate reluctance to train Luke. After experiencing Luke's midichlorian count firsthand, Yoda would have known exactly how his potential compared to Anakin's. The fact that this measurement led to hesitation suggests Luke's power, while significant, might not have been at the level needed to confront Vader and the Emperor. Consider Yoda's comment to Obi-Wan's ghost that there is another. According to this theory, this statement came from direct comparative knowledge. Having just measured Luke's Force potential through this transfer technique, Yoda could make an informed assessment about whether Leia might actually be better suited for the challenges ahead. The physical symptoms Luke experienced during this encounter support this theory. His confusion, his slightly dulled reactions, his inability to sense Yoda's true nature immediately. All of these could be explained by the temporary reduction in his own midichlorian count during the transfer. This would have been brief enough to avoid any permanent effects, but long enough for Yoda to take a precise measurement. Think about how this fits with what we know about Yoda's teaching style. He was never one to rely on crude measurements or simple observations. His centuries of experience would have taught him that understanding a potential student required deep insight. This midichlorian transfer technique would have given him the most accurate possible reading of Luke's capabilities and limitations. The theory also explains why Yoda's behavior changed so abruptly once he dropped his act. Having completed the transfer and analysis, he could shift immediately into his role as teacher, armed with precise knowledge of how to approach Luke's training. His subsequent lessons were all carefully calibrated to Luke's exact Force potential, which he now understood intimately. This understanding adds new meaning to Yoda's famous line about Luke being too old to begin the training. It was not just about age, but about the relationship between midichlorian count and emotional maturity. Having measured Luke's exact Force potential, Yoda could see that he had enough power to be dangerous, but possibly not enough to overcome the challenges ahead. Looking at the larger picture, this theory suggests something profound about Yoda's mastery of the Force. While other Jedi relied on technology and standard tests to measure Force potential, Yoda had developed a way to literally experience another's Force sensitivity firsthand. This would have given him unique insight into each student's capabilities and challenges. The technique itself reveals something about the nature of the light side. Unlike dark side powers, which often involve domination or control, this ability required a kind of temporary symbiosis. Yoda had to make himself vulnerable, allowing his own Force signature to blend briefly with Luke's in order to gain the understanding he sought. This interpretation also helps explain why this technique is not widely known or documented. It would require both extraordinary Force sensitivity and centuries of experience to develop and control. Few Jedi would have had both the power and the lifespan to master such a subtle and sophisticated ability. The impact of this measurement would have influenced all of Yoda's subsequent interactions with Luke. Every training exercise, every lesson, every challenge would have been precisely calibrated to Luke's exact Force potential. This explains why Yoda's training methods, while seemingly random, ultimately proved so effective in preparing Luke for his confrontation with Vader. Throughout the Clone Wars and beyond, Obi-Wan Kenobi became famous for his signature greeting, "Hello there." While most viewed it as a simple quirk of personality, this theory suggests it was actually something far more profound. According to this interpretation, Obi-Wan had developed a subtle light side technique that used these specific words to momentarily connect with the inner light still present in his opponents. This theory suggests that Obi-Wan discovered this technique during his early days in the Clone Wars. As a master of Form 3 lightsaber combat, he was already skilled at defensive techniques and reading his opponents. But he began to notice that certain words, spoken with the right intent and Force focus, could create brief moments of connection even with enemies. The phrase "hello there" was perfect for this technique for several reasons. First, it was disarmingly casual, catching opponents off guard and creating a momentary break in their hostile focus. Second, it was genuinely friendly, carrying no threat or aggression. Third, and most importantly, it acknowledged the humanity or sentience in the other person, speaking to the light that existed within them rather than their current role as an enemy. Think about how consistently Obi-Wan used this greeting, even in the most dangerous situations. Whether facing battle droids, bounty hunters, or Sith Lords, he would often begin encounters with these same words. According to this theory, each use was actually a subtle Force technique, reaching out to touch whatever spark of light remained in his opponent. The theory suggests that Obi-Wan would infuse the words with light side energy as he spoke them. This was not a mind trick or an attempt at control. Instead, it was more like offering a gift, a brief reminder to his opponents of their own capacity for good. Even if they ultimately chose to continue fighting, they were given a moment to consider another path. This interpretation helps explain why Obi-Wan maintained this practice even when dealing with mechanical opponents like battle droids. The Force flows through all things, even artificial life, and Obi-Wan's greeting was attempting to connect with whatever spark of independence or consciousness might exist within them. Sometimes this actually worked, causing droids to hesitate or respond in unexpected ways. But the most interesting evidence for this theory comes from General Grievous's reactions to the greeting. The cyborg general seemed particularly agitated whenever Obi-Wan used his signature phrase. According to this theory, this was because Grievous's unique nature made him especially vulnerable to this light side technique. Consider Grievous's condition. As a being who was part organic and part mechanical, he existed in a state of constant internal conflict. The organic parts of him, however small, would have still contained some connection to the light side of the Force. When Obi-Wan used his technique, it would have resonated strongly with these remaining organic elements, creating uncomfortable awareness of his lost humanity. This explains why Grievous often responded to "hello there" with particular aggression. The greeting was not just annoying to him, it was actively threatening, reminding him of what he had lost and the choices that had led him to his current state. His fierce reactions were attempts to quickly suppress the moments of clarity Obi-Wan's technique created. The theory also helps explain something else about Obi-Wan's fighting style. He often seemed to engage in conversation with his opponents, even in the middle of deadly combat. These were not just witty quips or attempts at distraction. Each interaction was an opportunity to employ this light side technique, creating multiple chances for his opponents to choose a different path. Look at how this fits with what we know about Obi-Wan's character. Throughout his life, he consistently tried to find peaceful solutions even in violent situations. This technique would have been a perfect expression of that philosophy, allowing him to offer redemption even while defending himself. It represented a uniquely light side approach to combat, focusing on salvation rather than destruction. The theory suggests that Obi-Wan continued to refine this technique throughout his life. By the time he confronted Vader on the Death Star, his "hello there" had evolved into something even more powerful. His greeting to his former apprentice in that final encounter was not just habit or politeness, but one last attempt to reach whatever light remained in Anakin Skywalker. Consider, too, how this technique influenced those around Obi-Wan. Other Jedi might have noticed the unusual effectiveness of his greeting, but few would have understood its true nature. This was not the kind of technique that could be easily taught or passed on. It required a genuine desire to see and connect with the light in others, something Obi-Wan possessed in abundance. This understanding transforms our view of many famous Star Wars scenes. Each time we hear Obi-Wan say "hello there," we are actually witnessing a subtle but powerful light side technique in action. It was not just a catchphrase, but a consistent attempt to offer redemption, to create moments of possibility, to remind his opponents of their own capacity for good.